Hi. So now I want to backtrack on one thing I said, where I said, you need to know um, you didn't have to pick between the psychological, the structural, and the interactional. I want to make a case for the interactional. So let's sort of catch back up there. Think of two ways of portraying the social world. One sees individual attitudes as creating larger social structures. So the idea there is what you think, what you decide, what you desire determines how you act. And then as people, based upon their own desires and thoughts, act, those things become larger social structures. And so the foundation of any society, its economics, its culture, its politics, and the explanation for any actions you see in the world are founded, at their bottom, things that go on inside the mind. For those reasons, some people would see that as an idealism. Also notice it's not empirical. You can't watch the thinking happen. The motivations, the desires are often unexplained where those things come from. They talk about people having aptitudes, intelligence, capabilities, but it's hard to say where exactly those things would come from. But in any case, that's the source for that side. Now, second side would see larger social structures as creating individual attitudes. Your feelings about things, your preferences for things, what you like to eat depends upon where you grow up. I grew up in Oklahoma. We don't eat a lot of sushi. It might have something to do with the amount of water we're surrounded by, or how many people we have in that state that come from places that do eat sushi. The idea is that your race, your economic location, your gender, your education, your occupation, those social positions, those structural positions determine what you'll think, what you'll believe, what you'll want. And so if you want to explain people's actions, you still would go back to their attitudes and thoughts, but those parts of an individual are actually built from their structural location as opposed to something else. So those are two common ways of seeing things. One has a foundation that's psychological, the other has a foundation that's structural. And I'm sorry for having repeated this so many times. Now, both of those sides have insights to bring to bear, and you'll find both of them well represented within sociology. The third perspective, not so much. And I want to build that perspective by talking about a weakness in the psychological and the structural, which is both of them take empirical action as epiphenomenal. When we know by now epiphenomenal means it's not the primary phenomena. It's not the foundation of everything else. For those that see the psychological forces, the thinking, the desire, self-control as most important, action is explained by those things. If you see somebody acting, the action is important because it's an indication of what's going on inside the person. The action in and of itself is only important as it indicates what's inside. Now, for those that are talking about economic and other structural locations, action's also not the primary phenomena. For those people, the way that you act is based upon where you are, the things you have to do, the things you're constrained to do, the choices that you have to make are based upon your economic, political, cultural, social locations. And so those actions really are important because they indicate what part of your structural location is relevant at a particular point. But the actions in and of themselves aren't important. So both the psychological and the structural perspectives share the idea that empirical action itself is not a primary phenomena. I hope that part worked. All right, so now we'll move on. I kind of want to not so much change your perspective on this, because most people will come at this from the individual responsibility side, which in sociology we often talk about as agency, or from the structural side, which in sociology we usually talk about as structure. But I do want to suggest that there's some insight to be had into how the world actually works by taking action seriously. Now, all three books that you've had so far in their own distinct ways are arguing for this position. Now, I just want to start off by looking at the commonplace of law, and I'm going to look at the second paragraph on page 39. Seeking to identify the real material workings of the legal system. When you hear real and material, usually you're talking about structural there. Rather than the ideal of a rule of law. And again, the ideal is, well, okay, we'll get to it in a little bit. Socio-legal scholars created their own particular duality between law in the books and law in action. Research became preoccupied with dichotomies between law and state, equality and hierarchy, and its own version of agency and structure, and debates about consent and coercion. In order to understand how individual action and understanding are implicated in the production of legality, we've sought an approach to legal consciousness that would mediate those opposing positions. So let me explain that a little bit. What they're saying is the way that the socio-legal studies have usually gone is to the study of attitudes and what people think of as the law, or to the study of law books, to the actual laws themselves, disconnected from any real social reality. And action has pretty much been taken out of the field. And what they're trying to do is to bring it back a little bit. So in bringing it back, what they are trying to say is this: our actions with each other, our actions with each other create the larger social structures, and our actions with each other create the psychological thoughts and feelings and controls that we feel. So action is the foundation. And what they're trying to do with legal consciousness is capture a notion of action that they can use to explain structural location and the psychological processes. The advantage to this, if they can do it, is that they will be able to have an empirical foundation for the study of law and society. So instead of imagining what goes on inside the body, because thoughts, motivations, rationality are concepts that don't have an empirical basis. We can't go inside the body and find your thoughts in anything that looks like a reasonable thing. We have the lively sense that they're there, but that's not actually how you found science, any science, and certainly not one of society. At the same time, Katz talks about this with your structural location. There are people who grow up in poverty, around a great deal of crime, with very few other ways to make money, who nonetheless don't commit crimes. Not only that, but there's a lot of people that have plenty of opportunities to do other things, and they still commit crimes. Structural location doesn't explain everything, and neither do psychological processes or mental illnesses. Okay, so let me look a bit at page 45. They've got a definition here of legal consciousness again. It's a little bit changed from the last one, but still in line with what we're talking about. With this conception of legality as a structural feature of society in place, we use the phrase legal consciousness to name participation in the process of constructing